Fiona's talk. Fiona will share what she learned about cannabis regulation after 8 years in Victoria Parliament, and how do we get politicians to the cannabis grown-ups table. What is the political sweet spot and possible models from overseas? So,
thanks, Dave. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. I hope you're cool enough. You're getting a bit of breeze in the back. Good. As I said, thank you so much. My name is Fiona Patten, and I was a member of Parliament until last year, and have been a cannabis and harm reduction advocate for probably close on 30 years. Unlike my partner, who will be celebrating his 50th year of the Aquarius Festival this Friday. Robbie. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that this is Aboriginal land. It has been Aboriginal land for over 60,000 years. It was never ceded. And may we see a change, and we know the impact that colonisation has had on our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, and certainly our drug laws are part of that. Just looking at the notes today, over 8% of the cannabis arrests in Victoria are Aboriginal people, yet they represent less than 1% of our population. So ridiculously overrepresentative. So I'd like to pay my respects to Aboriginal elders here today, and any Aboriginal people who are here today. So, you've got a whole bunch of politicians in the room, not me. I can see 1, 2, 3. I can see at least 3 MPs in the room, and I'm missing someone. I've got Brian, David, Rachel. Who wants to be a politician? Good, you are one. I no longer want to be one. I thought today, before we start having that conversation on how we do bring politicians to the grown-ups table, and how we do keep moving the dial. And to be honest, while it seems like we are just going, 2 steps forward, 3 steps backwards, we have made progress. And weirdly, actually, I was just, the library at the Victorian Parliament, before I left, handed me a giant brown box. I was quite excited. Who knows? They said, we know you like drugs, and handed me this box. Well, I know. Imagine how excited I was opening that when I got home. Anyway, it wasn't what we may have thought it might have been, but it was press clippings around drug policy for the last 50 years. And there are thousands and thousands of them. But we kind of randomly pulled some out of this lucky dip of a box. I found 2 calling for the death penalty for drug users, and that was in 1972. We had one this one did take my fancy, and I think it'll probably take yours too. LSD flowing in cities like water. That was, in case you missed it, in case you weren't alive, that was on the 24th of June 1971. And in 1973, the government was urged to register all people who use drugs. Now, in actual fact, they were also calling for them to be decriminalised. And in 1971, when they were talking about LSD running like water throughout the streets of our cities, they were also calling for drug decriminalisation. They were saying, so in 73 they recognised it had failed. And we have seen some movement. So we've seen the ACT do some really good work around depenalising the use of cannabis and the growing of cannabis. And in actual fact, you can grow cannabis in a number of jurisdictions in Australia. It's not great, but it is better than the death penalty, and it is better than where we were registering drug addicts. So we have made some movement. Medicinal cannabis. Now, I think we should discuss this a bit later. Like, is that how we're going to legalise adult use cannabis in Australia? Or are we going to go down an adult use model? And when you look around the world, you'd probably say that medicinal cannabis provided the catalyst for adult use in just about every jurisdiction in the world. So I'd like to talk about sort of the ways that politicians are influencing the debate, the way you are influencing the debate, the way the people who come to MardiGrass are influencing the debate. But before I was a politician, I loved to travel. Before I was a politician, I loved cannabis, and I still do. When I was a politician, I still loved cannabis. And I wasn't, and like the other politicians in this room, I wasn't afraid to talk about it. And most politicians are. Most politicians are absolutely petrified of what will happen if they say, I use drugs. Not alcohol, of course, not tobacco, of course, not any helpful other prescription medications that they may use, but if they say they use an illicit substance, they're absolutely petrified. So in private, they might tell you. In private, they might tell you. They might also say, oh, I used to take drugs, didn't inhale, or even did inhale. We certainly, and look, that's fine. I was smoking a joint one day during a parliamentary inquiry. It was after hours. I was outside in the parking lot of a hotel, but so was another politician. She was out there having a fag and a final double shot of whiskey. And she had it in 2 separate glasses, her shots of whiskey. So I was walking past her, she said, would you like some? And I said, oh no, I'm okay. Would you like some of this? And she said, oh, no, thank you. But we've all tried it in our day. And anyway, she then fought me against cannabis reform for the whole time we were in Parliament together. But anyway, when you are politicians, and what we've been able to do is actually travel. And as I said, before I was a politician, I loved travelling. So I remember going to India, Thailand, or India where, cannabis was, it sits in a very grey area, bang. You're not necessarily going to get arrested. Back when I was in Thailand, yes, you would get arrested, but 100 baht would get you unarrested there. And now we've seen an enormous change that we've seen over in Thailand now. The Netherlands have been a leader in this area. But as politicians, it was, as a politician, travelling with the eyes of politicians, it was very interesting. And with politicians, I've travelled to Colorado, the Netherlands, California, Canada, Oregon. We've seen, and so politicians have seen what a regulated market can look like, and they don't disagree with it. How you get them from, I don't disagree with that, to let's change the law is the challenge. And looking at the models that we saw, particularly in North America, where you've got a much more laissez-faire approach, we saw, and they can boast about the wonderful taxes that they're making. University is free in Colorado now for Coloradians because of the money that they've raised from cannabis. We're seeing the market in Canada really starting to mature. There's still a whole range of equity issues. There's still a range of that it is still being run by large organisations, large multinational companies. And California, well, when we met with the Treasurer there and talked about their great plans for legalisation, he made the probably astute observation that 80% of what is grown in California 5 years after legalisation will be illegal because they supply the rest of the country. And they supply the illicit market in the country. So there was lots of models to see. We see the Netherlands where, it's not it's not out there. There's not massive billboards around advertising cannabis like there was in the North Americas. It's much more discreet. And then we've seen the sort of changes that we're seeing in in Germany, but also in Malta. So Malta is issuing its first cannabis association licenses. And these are licenses issued, I think it's to less than 500, you can have an not-for-profit association, less than 500 members, and that association can grow and sell to its members. Now this is recognising, as we found in the ACT, you can decriminalise cannabis and you can allow people to possess and use cannabis, even grow it. But for the vast majority of people, they're not going to grow it. They can't grow it. They live in an apartment. They live with young children. They don't want to grow it. So still, in the ACT, somewhere between 80 and 90% of the cannabis used in that jurisdiction is illegal and illegally sourced. So this is what Malta has tried to solve. So their first licenses were issued just a few months ago. They passed the law about a year ago, and they will see up to 10 of these associations open. They'll be able to make a profit, as long as it's with, they want everybody to get paid, they want everybody to be paid well. They're enabling people to, if you've been arrested for a cannabis-related charge, you can still be part of an association. So they've effectively expunged most cannabis prosecutions as part of this legislation. It's still early days, but it's looking really promising, and certainly as this sort of small step into a commercial market that doesn't open it up to the multinationals and big corporations diving in and making it difficult for anyone else, and also where we've seen the way they have exploited their abilities with alcohol and tobacco. We probably don't want to see anyone exploiting those abilities and their size with our favourite plant of cannabis. So in Australia, it's worth looking at the numbers. We love cannabis. We absolutely love it. We love it more than just about anyone else in the world. But we love it more than the Dutch, like a lot more. We love it more than the Canadians. The New Zealanders, they kind of like it about the same amount as we do. But well over 30 to 40% of us will use cannabis in our lifetime. It's pretty steady, but it's high for the world. It's around 20% in the United States, for example, and around Europe it sits in the 20s. So yeah, it is considerably higher in Australia. Go us. I mean, that's one of the good numbers. Sadly, I'm going to tell you some bad numbers. Although, another good number, depending on how you see it. Oh, and I apologise, Sophia Baldwin. Hello, good to see you. Another politician who uses cannabis. I used to be the only one in the room, the only one in the village. Now, God, look at you all. And they all found that coming out wasn't so bad. But some of the other figures that I've been looking at has been less good, but one of the good ones is that young people smoke cannabis more than older people. That we generally, apparently mortgages, children, a whole range of things impact our use of cannabis as we get older. So 26% of young people use cannabis regularly compared to 11% of the general population. Those numbers are probably 3 or 4 years old, so there might have been a change since the change in medicinal cannabis laws and the real expansion of the medicinal cannabis market, but it's around that. Less than 11% of young people smoke cigarettes. So I think when you think that double them smoke cannabis, okay, some people would say that's a bad thing, but it shows you what an illicit market does, or what a licit market does. When you can regulate something, when you can say, actually, we are going to put age restrictions on this. You can control it, as we do with tobacco, and we also do, good education for young minds. But we arrested 72,000 people nationally in a year for drug use. For the drug use, 72,000 people for cannabis. We arrested 72,000 people for cannabis, about half of all of the drug arrests for minor drug arrests in the country. Cannabis consumer arrests in Victoria in 1 year were 10,000. So close to 10,000 people were arrested for the use or possession of cannabis in Victoria. Now everyone tells you it doesn't happen. Well, sorry, the magistrate court statistics tell you it does happen. These are people who are not getting cautioned. These are people who are getting arrested and going through a court system. They may get a court caution, but these are not the diversions that you hear that police are doing. They're generally, the average quantity on arrest and possession is 54 grams. So, yeah, check your pockets. I checked mine before I came here, because we did get stopped by the police on the way in. Nice young man, you know. Was I don't know if did anyone else get stopped by the police?
My friend did. And he we camped down there, and some lovely people next to him gave him 3 fish and 3s. Chewed him up, and he passed the test, he reckons. They must work, and he died, unless my roots were up.
Well, the police officer that we had seemed to be doing a survey on attitudes to cannabis law. So he was asking us what we thought about cannabis law. Were we on the side of, we're driving into Nimbin for MardiGrass. Are we pro-cannabis reform or not? Again, we're driving into MardiGrass. Anyway, we said that we were, and he said, well, look, there's a lot of good arguments for cannabis reform, I'll grant you, but I'm worried about the young people. I'm very worried about the young people. And this is something that we have to strike. It's the young people. What about the young people? Okay, I go back to 11% of young people have smoked tobacco, 26 or 24 have smoked cannabis. So the laws that we have now are not protecting young people from smoking cannabis. Possibly the laws that we have are protecting young people from smoking tobacco. So maybe we could look at that, and that is one of the arguments I think we can use around that once someone please think of the children. Now there's now been 2 use of cannabis inquiries in Australia. I chaired one, and Brian Walker chaired the other one. I'm sorry, Brian, I am not across yours, but I know at the next session we will hear all about it. But in ours, it was really interesting. We were talking, again, the committee was not really against reform. It was finding what it was. Now, there was lots of shenanigans in mine. As chair, I made a whole bunch of recommendations. Let's legalise and regulate. Recommendation 1, in fact, of the report was that the government should legalise and regulate. Anyway, I lost the vote on that one. I got knocked out by Liberals and Labor on that. However, they didn't change the body of the report. So all the findings say cannabis should be legalised and regulated. And all of the committee agrees that these are the basic principles for legalising and regulating cannabis. I don't know about you, Brian or Sophia, in your time in Parliament, but I always read the reports where my name is going to go on them. I found that many of our colleagues don't. So they read the recommendations. So we had argy-bargy about recommendations. No one worried about me saying that that the committee agreed that we should regulate cannabis following these principles, which is now in the body of the report. So yeah, note for the MPs in here, many politicians don't read the reports that they're writing or that they're part of, and that comes to help you. Now, another challenge for politicians in the room, I went back and looked at Hansard today. I spoke about cannabis 9 times a week, so just putting it out there. Brian, you're probably pretty close, good. 1,120 cannabis mentions over the 8 years. So it's worked out how many sitting weeks that was, worked out about 9 times a week. All of you, I'll be doing this, I'll be following those stats. We might do some monthly stats for how many times politicians, because I know, in fact, some of my opponents possibly talked about cannabis almost as much. But anyway, so what we recommended, and I just want to pull it up so I don't, what we recommended is that there needs to be a sweet spot. And that means that you need to prevent access from young people and children. Now, I know when we legalised medicinal cannabis in Victoria, we only allowed young children to use it. I'm sure it was the first legalisation of medicinal cannabis where it was still illegal for adults, it was only legal for children. Now, as you know, that all changed very quickly after the federal government changed their medicinal cannabis laws. But first and foremost, we must think of the children. So in thinking about a regulated system, and I know that a laissez-faire system would be wonderful, but to actually get something that you're not going to get arrested for, we need a system that prevents access to children and young people, improves the health and well-being of the community, and reduces the overall harms associated with cannabis through regulating the availability, the potency, and the production standards of the product. So let's make sure that products that are available to the public don't have mold on them, aren't using pesticides, other unfortunate chemicals, and that we know what we're getting. Improve awareness of the health and mental health risks associated around cannabis, because as we know, it would be very good to educate people about them because they're very misunderstood and often exaggerated. The idea that cannabis leads to psychosis, there's just been another recent report which soundly puts that myth to bed. Now certainly, people who have got mental health issues do need to be careful about what they take into their bodies. No doubt. Alcohol, tobacco, sugar, whatever it might be, cannabis as well. But we also know in our medicinal cannabis experiences that it actually has helped a lot of people with various mental health conditions. And reduce the impact of criminalisation of cannabis on Victorians. So reduce criminal activity, reduce the impact of criminal activity, protect children, protect consumers, and improve awareness about it. Those are the principles that we should base our steps toward, base our conversations to politicians on as well. We also, I think we need kind of coming out stories. And I know it's hard because some people can't come out because they work in a workplace where that would mean they lost their jobs. But we do need to start coming out. We do need to start having those conversations and start talking about our own stories, and that we're not those people who are not necessarily those people who are experiencing homelessness, and that that this drug has sent them to the gutter. And of course, you smoked one joint or injected it into your eyeball or whatever you do with cannabis, however you might use it, and then you injected heroin the next day. Again, that myth has been roundly put to bed. In fact, it was put to bed in 1973, but it still goes around. So, when we start talking about politicians about this, we want to say we want to protect children and young people. We want to improve awareness. We want to address making the consumer safer. So is Medcan the answer? And I'd like to raise that. I'd be interested in what people in this room, all of you who've been campaigners on this, think. Are we going to follow every other jurisdiction or North America's, and just slowly our medicinal cannabis laws will become more and more open, our prescribing doctors will become more and more relaxed about who and why they're prescribing the medication? I mean, we've all seen this breakneck, or this incredibly rapid change in prescribing from oils to flower. And I think that's the model that we saw in Canada, it's models that we've seen in other jurisdictions as well. So is this the way? I mean, I've certainly spoken to people who said, you know, the people of my age, it's my birthday today, by the way. So my age is a year older today, but people my age saying, this is brilliant. Like, I don't have to hassle my grown-up children to get me cannabis. I don't have to, or I haven't used it for years, but now I can get it from my doctor and I can have an evening joint and I sleep better. It's got me off the grog during weekdays, you know. But for them, they see it as a legal form, as now their legal avenue to cannabis, and I think we're seeing more and more adults starting to see this as a way to get through. So our ask has to be reasonable and it has to be evidence-based, and we've got the evidence. So we've got jurisdictions now who have had legalised systems, whether that's Uruguay, whether that's Canada, whether that's Oregon, whether that's the Netherlands, whether you've got the decriminalisation model in Portugal, where you've got the grey models, the grey markets which don't necessarily work around Spain, but where you've got legal markets that have shown the sky didn't fall in. Road accidents didn't go through the roof. Children still went to school. People still went to work. We didn't all turn into stoner sloths. We all managed. But it needs personal stories. It needs personal stories, and they don't need to be stories of redemption, but they need politicians love a personal story. They love, and you know, Brian and Sophia will be more familiar with this. Rachel and David are they're only in their 5th week of Parliament. 6-month, 5th week. We don't sit a lot of parliaments. I think it's about that, isn't it? So finding things to talk about in member states, contributing to other pieces of legislation, having those stories from your community to add that colour, add that dimension to what you're saying to your other, what politicians are saying to other politicians is really helpful. And we need to be doing this at a grassroots level, but we also need to be doing it at more sophisticated levels. You know, I think we need to be talking to some of the peak drug bodies about improving their policies, but we've got to have a policy. And unfortunately in Australia, you know, we've got federal law, we've got state law, and we've got local law. We are not going to fix it with one federal bill. With one bill that says we're going to legalise everything federally, and we're going to legalise it federally in every state and local council. That's not going to work. We are going to need changes, but small changes to federal law could have a really big impact on state legislation. So some very small changes to our federal legislation, our drug prohibition legislation could have very significant changes to how we deal with it in the States. And in the States, I think we are moving. You know, I mean, look at how many legalised cannabis MPs we're electing. You know, in New South Wales and Victoria, they have balance of power in the upper house. Now, that doesn't mean that they can get absolutely everything, and they're not like the little young emperor that can sit there and, you know, and get everything. But it does bring them to the table, and it brings cannabis reform to the table, and it becomes an important component in what wants to be achieved. And I know Brian and Sophia have really pushed without that balance of power, have also managed to move the needle over there. That there is a more relaxed, there is greater understanding of it. So it is awareness that we need, but we do need other organisations. So we need to be starting to lobby, not just our politicians. So it is talking to some of our peak body groups, and I'm looking at you, Will, on this. You know, we need to be talking to the AMA. The AMA supports decriminalisation, that's these medical associations. We need to be talking to the other drug associations. We need to be talking And, you know, we did this cannabis inquiry and we got over 1,000 submissions. Every single organisation who put in a submission, bar three, supported cannabis reform. Drug-Free Australia didn't. You know, their name is very deceiving. They don't want to make drugs free. And they're related, their parent company, the Delgado Institute, and the police. But the rest, 1,000 and something submissions, and every legal organisation called for law reform. Every health organisation called for law reform. Every civil society organisation called for law reform. So we need to get them in with us. They need to be signatories on our letters. So we can have, yes, we can have the legalised cannabis party, we can have the reform organisations that are born from the grassroots that MardiGrass grows, but we also need to start lobbying those other organisations and start giving them giving them the script and giving them the words to start doing this. Now, for me, I think if we are going to, the way that we should go, and this is my personal opinion as a former member, I think it is down social clubs. I think it is down something small. So I think it is doing this in small increment ways is actually the path of least resistance, the path that will work for us, where we're not immediately commercialising this amazing plant, that we're looking at social clubs and that we're looking at not-for-profits and obviously homegrown, with possibly some with some gifting. You know, I think those are sort of the low-hanging, well, they're not that low, but they're the lower-hanging fruits, and I think that's where I would be wanting to speak to politicians and talking to them about taking on, I think a slow model. We've just seen Germany do, not a 180, just a 90-degree, and gone from a fairly full commercial model to a much more restricted, not-for-profit model. So I'll leave it there because I've talked for too long, and I really feel it's my birthday and I should have a joint. But, you know.
So I've got like a couple more minutes. Has anybody got any questions? Yeah.
G'day, Fiona. As you know, I was involved with things that was happening on down in Victoria, and I was probably the reason why kids were the first to get it.
Yeah.
A lot of the reason was when you were saying about kids, I said to a lot of politicians is they call this a war, and kids are not allowed to be used in war. They're not supposed to be up front. They're supposed to, we're supposed to look at them and say, well, hang on, what's the information here? If we can help these people, let's do some trials. Let's find out and take the kids out, but altogether. I was involved in same in New South Wales, in what happened here in New South Wales, and I'm afraid a lot of the times when the politicians walk out of that room, they forget what it was about.
We stand on your shoulders, my friend. I mean, medicinal cannabis is legal in this country because of the work and sacrifice that you have made, including jail term. But I think it's a very interesting point when you go back to our embarrassing numbers and you look at those tens of thousands of arrests for possession. Young people are well overrepresented in that. Yes, young people use cannabis more, but they are well overrepresented in that. So we are sending our young people down a criminal justice pathway, and we know the impact. And we know the impact of a young person using cannabis. We know the impact of a young person misusing cannabis. But we most importantly know the impact of a young person hitting the criminal justice system.
Yeah, definitely that. I think 100% right, but as you know, what we put into when they were having what's names and that to do with cannabis and that, we showed that you can't actually fix this problem until you know what's involved and who's involved. So you've got to be able to, like they're doing now, getting people to register with their doctor and all the rest. And as we know, some people shouldn't use cannabis, young and old, because it does give them a problem. But there's no way of fixing it until you know who's there.
There you go, basic principles. Protect the consumer, protect young people.
Yeah, but you have to get people to be registered or know what they're about, so that you can say, well, right, yeah, you're using too much or you're using it too strong.
Two more questions.
Thanks, Fiona. My name is Will Trevunning. I'm from the Drug Law Reform Campaign Organisation Unharmed. My question is about something that often comes up in the kind of conversations that I'm sure you've been a part of as well, where there's a tension between the idea that we should pick the low-hanging fruit and the idea that unless we go for everything, we're undercutting the opportunity for those smaller reforms. And I mean, you know, we're often in conversations where we're talking about this incredible opportunity to decriminalise cannabis use, which in our view should incorporate home grow. And then people come and say, well, won't that undercut the opportunity for full legalisation? You might want, in answering that, I'd be curious if there's any observations you've got from your work in voluntary assisted dying, where another reform, for those who don't know, that you've played an instrumental role in Victoria. And you know, I've looked at those campaigns closely, and the scale of investment that went into those campaigns was well above what we've been able to achieve, and certainly well above what any other organisation in the cannabis law reform spaces. My response to people who say we should just legalise is, you know, a polite version of, well, show me the strategy, and I've never seen one that was credible and funded. But I'd be just curious, you know, what your reflections are.
Thanks, Will. It's a really good point, and it is difficult, but I think also the word decriminalisation is difficult, and it's difficult for politicians other than the ones in this room to get their heads around. So recently, in Victoria, for example, we decriminalised sex work. Now, I worked very hard on that, but we use that term decriminalisation, and that actually means legalise and regulate when it's used for sex work. So I think we should actually always be talking about regulating it, but in small steps. So our initial way to regulate it would be allow adults to grow their own and possess it. So it's not a form of decriminalisation, it's a form of regulation. Now, if you need to keep some penalties in it, and then, you know, look, I would go straight to social class, because I think it's ridiculous. It's stupid to have this double side where it's legal to be a consumer, but it's illegal to provide the product the consumer wants. Many of you will know that I was involved in X-rated videos and the adult industry for many years, when it was legal to own an X-rated film, it was legal to buy an X-rated film, but you went to jail for selling one. So using that analogy, I think if we can start moving away from, I think the term decriminalisation hasn't done us any favours now.
We've only got one time for a really quick gentleman here.
What we've got to worry about is if we let medical, if we don't go for total legalisation, what could happen to this drug is that it will get regulated by the Medical Association as all regulated drugs like Valium or any scripted drug you cannot share with a friend. And that's what at the moment, the elephant in the room is, if we keep pushing medical too hard and not the legalisation for recreational, that it could be taken off us, the drug could be taken away from us and regulated as a normal scripted drug. And that's the scariest thing. That's what it's going to put fear in everyone, because they take this off us because we've mucked around and we push medical, other medication, and it's great, but we have to push legalisation and recreational, so they will own it, they'll take it from us.
Yeah, no, I totally get your point. I think to give you some comfort in that, when you look at Canada and most of the jurisdictions in the United States,
That's what they're worried about over there now.
well, no, but that where they have legalised it, it has been born out of medicinal cannabis, but the regulation of the adult use product is a very different form of regulation, and it's just making sure there's no pesticides and making sure that the consumer is aware of the strength, the strain, and the quality.
Back to the medical, and that's
Yeah, I'm going to take the point. I think it's a well-made
we
warning.
missed that, we're gone. So we be careful to watch that.
Can we wish Fiona a very happy birthday?
Thank you. Thank you.
A good round of applause for sharing her wealth of information with us. Thank you so much. We're a little bit over time. Is there a Jeremy Buchan?